Hello and welcome to the Coffee Milk Hour. And do we have a show for you tonight? This is Jerry Nutini with my co-host.
I'm Puffy.
He's Puffy.
And I'm sad.
And he's sad. Why are you sad today?
I'm sad for many reasons. One, because Donald Trump is now the unabated Republican nominee. But we're not going to talk about that.
We're not going to talk about it. It's not worth
It just
talking
makes me
about.
sad. I'm also
right now.
I'm more sad because Bernie won Indiana last night against all odds.
I didn't know he won Indiana last night.
Well, you wouldn't know he won Indiana last night if you looked at websites like CNN, Jerry, because all CNN talked about was how Hillary Clinton is guaranteed to win and how even though Bernie won, he didn't really win.
I haven't heard that Bernie has a chance to win from anyone. CNN says that she's going to win, and MSNBC says she's going to win, and she's got all the super delegates, so she's going to win.
Did you know that they're wrong? It's not necessarily that they're wrong, but rather they're just pushing an agenda for Hillary Clinton.
Obviously, I'm playing a little bit dumb here. So last night, Puffy and I go out to play pool. It's the Indiana primary. We know it's a must-win for Bernie, but we go out and we try to socialize. So we go down to the local establishment. We're shooting some pool, but we've got our phones and we're checking out the CNN Election Center to see the results come in. I think by the time we got to the pool hall, I'm pretty sure they'd already declared Trump the winner.
Yeah.
On the Republican side. Mm-hmm. So we go in, we're hanging out with some friends, and we're just kind of checking up on the election. And early on, Clinton has a small lead. But then the numbers come in, and Indianapolis has already voted, and it looks like Gary's voted, and all the urban areas are in, and Clinton's behind. And typically that's good for Bernie, and Bernie starts working out a lead up to 6 or 7% at one point.
Oh yeah,
I think
his highest was almost 8 points ahead at one point.
So we're sitting there thinking, wow. The latest poll that I saw had Hillary Clinton up 4%, margin of error 5%. Maybe Bernie sneaks out a 1 or 2% win, 5%, 6% win. That's a huge upset in a must-win state.
Absolutely.
So we watch the results come in. By the time we leave, I think they declared Bernie the winner.
They had, at about 65%.
About 65%. So all excited, get in the car. I turn up CNN, and they're not really talking about Bernie, but they are talking about Ted Cruz dropping out.
Which is big, and it's fair that they talk about that and focus on it. What irritated me was about 5 minutes into the ride back to the house, they start talking about the Democratic side of things, and I'm like, here we go. Let's hear about Bernie and his upset win and everything. And what they touched on more than that was more so Hillary is still going to win. Bernie won Indiana. We were wrong, but she's still going to win.
What is the road ahead for Hillary versus Trump? How does she approach Trump in the general election? As if Bernie Sanders hadn't pulled a huge upset.
They mentioned the Democratic nomination, and then they immediately turn around while still talking about that and say, well, how does Hillary face Trump in a general candidacy race? And I'm sitting here going, Bernie just won Indiana. He's not out of this thing. Why are they saying that he can't win? Did you know that it's highly unlikely for her to win? And by win, I mean reach 2383.
Without superdelegates, yes.
Right.
It's very difficult for her to, nearly impossible for her
it's
to
not
reach
like
2383.
If she hits 2383 with superdelegates before the contests are over, the contests are not over because the superdelegates are undecided until July. They can endorse unofficially throughout the race, which is what we're seeing with her 590 superdelegates backing her so far, but that's not the actual count. If July comes and in pledged delegates she's not at 2383, it's a contested convention. And the question is,
correct,
can she hit 2383 prior? This is where the media comes into play in its terms of bias. Everybody keeps saying that Bernie needs to win the remaining contests by, what did they say, 67%?
He would need to win roughly 68% of all remaining pledged delegates just to have a chance at securing the nomination if the superdelegates were to switch over to him.
Right. You know what percentage they didn't include? They don't include what percentage Hillary actually needs to win the remaining votes by to secure the nomination at 2383.
Okay, so before we get into all the math, and there is a lot of math, and we looked at a lot of different sources, and we actually spent probably about 3 hours putting together our own spreadsheet with state results. Before we get into the math, I'm a large consumer of news, mainly mainstream media. I don't have a distrust of mainstream media that a lot of my friends do. that you do.
How you doing?
I enjoy CNN. I do think they maybe lean a little left, but I think they're a moderate news network. MSNBC is where I go if I really want to feel good, because that's where there are like-minded people and liberals, and they definitely lean left. And I don't watch Fox News because not only do they lean to the right, but they're full of shit. So I don't watch Fox News.
I have no comment.
But I'm not hugely against the mainstream media. However, after last night, I was a little bit surprised that on neither CNN or MSNBC was there a debate that says, should Clinton be scared? Bernie Sanders has upset her again.
Should she jump back on the campaign trail rather than focusing on November?
The schedule ahead is highly favorable to Bernie Sanders.
Incredibly
We're
favorable
talking
to
about
Bernie.
northwestern states like California and Oregon, where when he won Washington, it was 80-20. Mm-hmm. Nearly 80% to 20%.
Oregon is projected to mimic that almost to a T.
Almost
80-20.
to a T. So we got back to the house. We were upset about the news reporting. And what we decided to do was figure out, Bernie Sanders says he has a path to victory. Why is Bernie still in this race if he can't win? So we started thinking, okay, well, obviously if she has all the superdelegates,
Right.
Bernie cannot win this race.
That's correct.
But neither can make it on pledged delegates. Even if they just went straight on pledged delegates currently, he's trailing in pledged delegates too. So we tried to figure out, how does Bernie get close? So we spent all night putting together a spreadsheet, which we're going to link to this feed, of what would happen should the superdelegates be given to the candidate who wins the state, but proportionally. So if there's, for just an easy example, if there are 10 superdelegates in Washington,
Right.
and Bernie wins 80-20, then he would be given 8 superdelegates, and Hillary would get 2. You would just kind of proportion them out like the pledged delegates are proportioned out.
Exactly. And this is under the presumption that the superdelegates would represent their state proportionately, as opposed to how they actually work, which is kind of just, we're going to do whatever the hell we want. Well, that's a little extreme. They typically side with the candidate that has the most votes.
The most
Historically,
overall votes.
They've never swung to a candidate that has less votes in pledged delegates than the other candidate.
Correct.
But so we got curious, and we were like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take every state in the Democratic primary and territory that has voted so far. We are going to mark the percentages down, take the actual pledged delegate distribution from, where did we source? CNN?
CNN was our main source.
Because it was the closest, but everything mirrored relatively closely. We took all the actual pledged delegates and distributed those to each candidate respectively. Then we took the superdelegates for each of those states and territories, and we distributed those proportionately. So in a state like New York, where there are 44 superdelegates, of which Clinton has 40 and Bernie has 0, with their slightly contested differences in percentages there.
Correct.
That changes under our system, under the hypothetical system. Hillary gains 26 of the 44 superdelegates, and Bernie walks away with 18, which is a swing of...
It's a net gain of 36.
Right.
So Bernie actually would, just on New York, he would actually catch up by 36 votes. Seeing New York was like mind-blowing. We're like, we got to do every state.
Yeah.
We need to do every state. So we did. We did every single state and every single territory. Pledged delegate, superdelegate, margin of victory in those states, and we gave out the superdelegates proportionately. And every time a state came along where we saw a huge swing for superdelegates going to Bernie, we thought, this is going to be within 100 votes.
Right.
This is going to be really close. We finish up. We do all the math. And we look at the chart that we have compiled.
And it's sad.
The chart is sad because despite all of our effort, the total delegate count at that point would be Hillary Clinton with 2,005 total delegates, including superdelegates, and 1,633 for Bernie, still trailing pretty heavily. Now, Hillary Clinton's total lead right now, including superdelegates,
in the real world,
is 774.
That's huge.
Okay, and in our scenario, it's 372. So if superdelegates are proportioned evenly, Bernie Sanders gains 402 votes, which is a massive gain.
Absolutely.
Just superdelegates. We're not changing pledged delegates. We're not saying, oh, well, if Bernie had one bigger here, we're not changing results, just redistributing those superdelegates. A 402 vote difference.
And there's a reason that we did this with superdelegates. There's been a lot of controversy with superdelegates lately, especially in this election cycle, with how they should be utilized in the election. A lot of states and a lot of people are really angry at the fact that regardless of who they vote for, their superdelegate during the primary race could still say, hey, no, we're going to go with the other candidate. And it begs the question, if you're a superdelegate of my state, should you not accurately represent my state?
Well, this kind of goes back to the discussion that you and I have had, is that I'm a registered Democrat. The Democratic Party is the organization that puts on the primary. The primary, in my eyes, and I think by definition, is not for the people. The primary is a private organization, aka the Democratic Party, asking its members who they believe should be the nominee. So naturally, independents just don't count. The independents did not register. They don't feel strongly enough to register to that party. And they have every right to choose whichever candidate they want in the general election. But they've kind of given up their voice in this unfortunate bipartisan system. Those independents are not able to vote. So I think it's unfair to say that that superdelegate represents my state, because they don't. They don't represent the state of Rhode Island. They represent the state Democratic National Party. So you're an independent. In Rhode Island and some other states, independents are lucky enough to vote for one party or another, but not both. There are some open primaries where independents were allowed to vote on either side. Right. And then there are closed primaries which heavily favor Hillary Clinton for Democrats or Republicans only. If you are not registered to that party, you do not have a voice.
Exactly.
So unfortunately for independents, and I think where a lot of anger with Bernie especially comes from, is Bernie has a massive independent following.
We're talking millions.
Well, obviously millions, and I believe he polls best against independents. I think last night he won independents like 74% to 36%.
Keeping in mind that independents in a general election make up 43% of the vote.
Correct. So I think when a lot of independents like a candidate, whether it's a Trump or a Sanders, but then they cannot go out and support that candidate, I think their natural reaction is to get upset with the process.
Right.
Okay? Now, I'm not here to say that the process is totally flawed. But there are definite issues with this process. But before we get into process issues and maybe some reform, I think we need to agree that the media, and last night was the big wake-up call for me, and it's taken, but the media has definitely blacked out Bernie Sanders.
Absolutely true. I've been saying it the entire time, and most recently, in the most recent months, there hasn't been a lot of data available to show for it, because you have to dig, because between October and January, between October 2015 and January 2016, there you can find charts, graphs, statistics that show the astronomical difference in Hillary's airtime and Bernie's airtime. And that directly correlates to searches. When you're in the opening stages of the primary race and you're not giving the one other candidate, the one other real candidate on the Democratic side, any sort of airtime, his searches are not going to go down because people are getting informed by mainstream media. You're essentially showing your bias by just crushing him with no airtime.
I have a couple of big issues looking back kind of retrospectively. The Democratic primary started out, Hillary Clinton wins Iowa, but by a narrow margin.
Very narrow.
It's a virtual tie.
Yeah.
And everyone's thinking, okay, Bernie's a serious candidate. They move on to New Hampshire, Bernie wins New Hampshire.
Right.
At that point, the primary kind of swings down to a large group of southern states.
Yes.
Where Hillary Clinton has historically had a huge advantage and continued to have a huge advantage.
Right. She had a very good swing going through that lower right corner of the U.S., bending back out towards central southern America, U.S.
Right. The interesting thing for me is that at that point the media decided to say Hillary Clinton has a huge lead. Even though the polls were showing that the west coast of the U.S. and a lot of the northern states in the U.S. were really heavily favoring Bernie Sanders, that wasn't the chosen dialogue. The dialogue wasn't Hillary did well in the South, will it be enough to counter Bernie in the West and the North? The dialogue was Hillary Clinton has jumped out to a huge lead.
Right. She just steamrolled Bernie. It's over.
How will Bernie Sanders recover?
Right.
How is he ever going to catch up?
He's always been painted in a defeated picture in the eyes of the mainstream media in comparison to Clinton. But in reality, it's been close.
Now, I do think that to an extent, I think that did him a favor. I think a lot like Barack Obama in 2008, he was kind of painted as the long shot candidate. He's never going to make it. And I think to an extent that does energize your base. And then
Sure.
Bernie came out and he won 8 out of 9 primaries in the West and then some northern states there.
Right. By large margins.
By huge margins in some states.
Including upsets in places like Michigan and Indiana.
And he had closed the gap to under 300.
Right.
From that point, it's been a little bit tough for him to recover, and I do think his campaign has made some mistakes.
Absolutely.
I do think in debates, I think he's been crushed. Honestly, I think he's been crushed. As at some point, I think people get tired of the same old sound bites. But then he kind of picked himself back up. He changed the dialogue a little bit, and he's now showing some strength. But the media, again, rather than saying California is coming up with 500, I believe it's 546.
Yes,
546
total delegates. 475 pledged delegates,
pledged.
71 superdelegates.
California alone would be enough for him to substantially close the gap in this primary. And I think what's really interesting is in the month of June, the final month of the primary, there are 933 delegates at stake.
Right.
Which is nearly as many as April and May combined.
Right.
So this idea of the home stretch or the primaries winding down is a little absurd since nearly 25% of all remaining delegates are voted for in the month of June.
It's offensive to the average American voting in these primaries, in these states coming up. The media thinks that they can get away with this picture of the primaries winding down, Hillary's going to get the nomination, Bernie should just go home, it was a good run, it's over. While when looking at it on paper, neither candidate can hit 2383. Let me rephrase that. Bernie cannot hit 2383.
Bernie can't, no.
In pledged delegates, it cannot happen. There are not enough remaining pledged delegates for him to go from where he's at now to 2383. However, and this is what the media doesn't do, they do not explain that Hillary needs to win by incredible margins to hit 2383 in states where she's not even favored to win a little bit.
With just pledged delegates.
At this
point, it's nearly impossible at this point for Hillary Clinton to hit 2383 with pledged delegates. Now, we're operating from the viewpoint that superdelegates only exist as a kind of a tiebreaker if two candidates get to the convention and neither has gotten to 2383. So under that logic, superdelegates don't matter until July.
Right, absolutely.
They can switch. They can go any which way they want.
They're not set in stone.
And as Jordan stated earlier, no Democratic candidate in history has ever had more pledged delegates at the convention and lost. That's never happened. So if there is a scenario where Bernie Sanders can overtake Hillary Clinton in pledged delegates, it would be assumed that all the superdelegates would have to, or would feel at least obligated to, go with Bernie Sanders in the first ballot.
If they didn't, and this is a theory, but let's say hypothetically Bernie overtakes Hillary in pledged delegate counts to a contested convention, if the superdelegates remained supportive of Hillary and gave her the nomination, it would be the first time in the history of the DNC that happened.
Correct.
And I guarantee you it would cause the biggest uproar within the party's civilians than we've ever seen. Because it would be a clear-cut indication of favoritism among a candidate and trying to snub another one from the nomination.
Absolutely. So some quick numbers here. Hillary Clinton needs 72% of the remaining state votes in order to get to 2383 for pledged delegates.
That's after Indiana, so we factored that in.
Therefore, it's unlikely that either candidate is going to hit that target of 2383. Assuming that the supers don't matter until the convention, our argument would be that the new number that we really need to look at is 2026. 2026 delegates is half, or just over the majority, of total pledged delegates. So, since we're only talking about pledged delegates, if either candidate can get over 2026 simply pledged, they should be the nominee at the convention.
4,051 delegates are the total count for pledged delegates available in the entire primary race. Cut that in half and evenly split it between the two candidates that are running, and you come out with 25.5. One of those half votes will go over to the other candidate, making 2026 the target number to reach the contested convention in July with the majority of pledge counts, because that will bring the superdelegates to your side.
So here's where things get really interesting. So Jordan and I had gotten really excited about our proportional allocation of delegates, and we were very disappointed when we discovered that Bernie Sanders would actually still need 68% of the remaining vote in order to reach 2383, and that includes superdelegates. What's interesting in this scenario is the schedule. Upcoming states to vote are California, Kentucky, West Virginia, New Jersey, and Oregon.
Right.
So we looked at the polls in some of these states. Hillary Clinton has about 49% in California, but that's really only among Democratic voters.
Correct. And that poll right now is in the decline as we get closer.
And now California is a semi-open primary, which means that independent voters can go vote.
As long as you register properly by May 23rd. May 23rd.
Assuming that Bernie can pick up some of the independents, or will pick up the majority of independents in California, if we make the assumption that California swings the same way as Washington, we'll give that one to Bernie. Kentucky and West Virginia, Bernie's currently leading in West Virginia. Right. As far as we know, Kentucky is about a tie.
It is about a tie with 40% roughly undecided.
A new poll out early this morning, I believe, has New Jersey favoring Bernie 57.4% in the polls.
Which is huge.
And Oregon, we would imagine, would vote with Washington and Idaho and California.
Historically, they have voted the same
as
Washington.
He may go 80-20 there. So, some scenarios. If Hillary Clinton wins California, let's just give it to her 60-40. Even if she wins those delegates, she will need to win 80% of the remaining vote in pledged delegates to reach the 2026 number.
Keeping in mind that every state subsequently, if she gets 60-40 in California, every state after that she doesn't win by 80% increases that margin that she needs to win the next one by, including Oregon and West Virginia, where Bernie currently leads.
However, if assuming Bernie Sanders takes California 70-30, and the reason we give him that is because other states in the area have given him margins of 70 or greater. We know we're giving him a little bit here, but if you give Bernie 70% in California, he only needs 64% of the remaining vote to get to the 2026 pledged delegates number.
And this is where that media bias comes in, because you keep hearing Bernie needs to win 67%, he needs to win 67%, but nobody's saying Clinton needs to win 80% if she loses California, which is likely. Even if she wins California, if she wins California, she still needs to win 80%. If she doesn't win California, she needs to win 90% to hit
correct
2026.
So what the media has done is very early on, they have included over 500 superdelegates with Hillary Clinton's count. And sure, it looks like she's going to be over the top.
Right, they create this mountain.
Because she has 500 votes that she hasn't earned from the voters.
That will not stay with her if she doesn't have the majority of pledged delegates at the convention.
So, I guess we need to argue a couple of things here. The first is that if the media is reporting very early on in the primary that Hillary Clinton has an insurmountable lead, do you think that that will discourage Bernie supporters from going out to the polls because they think Bernie's done?
Absolutely. The thing is, mainstream media rules the country. That's the way things are. Anytime that we have to do reference material for the show or in any argument that we've ever had, we usually have to go with a reputable mainstream media source, because anything outside of that is typically considered an opinion piece or something that can't be validated in the face of these companies like Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. So when these big mogul companies put this picture on the TV where most voters are getting their information, they're looking at it like there's no hope. There's no point. There's no hope. And there is a responsibility level there on the voter to continue to go out there and do it anyway, because it's your A, responsibility, and B, show your support for your candidate. Never give up until the fight's over. But it is outrageously disadvantageous to Bernie supporters.
If I live in Kentucky and I see that Bernie is down 700 delegates, if we include superdelegates.
Right.
And I know that my state's only worth 60, and it's probably going to split, and he's only going to get 30, or it's not going to make a difference. Why am I going to go to the polls?
Because they're not telling you.
Because they're not telling me. And I got to say, it took a lot of effort to do all this math.
Absolutely.
And I don't think every voter should have to sit down, look at all the states, look at the remaining delegates, figure out pledged delegates versus super delegates, and what are the percentages, because it's time consuming. And it is the media's job, I feel, to say, here's the real situation, here's what's actually going on. And some media outlets have said, okay, here's her with her superdelegate lead, but if we take away superdelegates, it's a 300-point lead.
Have you ever seen on any of the mainstream media sites or shows that you watch where they do the math in Bernie's favor?
No.
They only show he either loses A by this much or B by this much, which is less, but he still loses. They never show him in a scenario where he can win. In upcoming states where he leads, even in Jersey. Jersey has 126 pledged delegates available, and he's leading in the polls.
Right.
And it comes down to how the districts are split up and, where the different communities come in to vote. And that's how he's getting that advantage right now. But that's how it will be the day of the primary.
And there's an argument for momentum. Let's say Bernie goes out and wins California 70-30. When he closes that gap, other states will re-energize.
Absolutely.
And Bernie independents will go register. In New Jersey, which is another semi-closed primary.
Right.
Or semi-open primary. So there is an argument that Bernie Sanders can overtake Hillary Clinton in pledged delegates. Now, I'm not saying that this is feasible or that this is likely or that the media is hiding the truth. What I'm arguing is that as a voter, we need to be informed in any scenario. So the media shouldn't say Bernie Sanders should drop out because his road is next to impossible. Because next to impossible was Ted Cruz, who was mathematically eliminated from the Republican nomination, or John Kasich, who was mathematically eliminated. Bernie Sanders is nowhere near being mathematically eliminated. In fact, he's 40% of pledged delegates away from mathematical elimination.
Right.
He's much closer. So the media should not paint the picture that this is a race that's over.
They need to change the message. The media is still reporting every primary with 2383 in mind. That's not going to happen. Let's be honest here. There is no way, and you can call this an opinion, but if you look at the history of the states, plus the states that have voted around them already, there is no way that Oregon is a decisive loss for Bernie. There's no way that California is a decisive loss for Bernie. West Virginia is not a decisive loss for Bernie. So you can't say that Hillary's going to hit 2383, because even if he doesn't necessarily win these states, it's still going to be close enough to keep her from that number. It's not possible, in my opinion, for either candidate to make 2383. It's statistically impossible for Bernie. I find it highly unlikely for Hillary. Again, because if she wins California, she needs 80% of the remaining vote. If she loses California, even in a 51-49, she still needs to win 90% of the remaining vote.
Now, some people have argued, okay, well, if Bernie gets close, he should still contest the convention. They bring up things like all the voting issues that they had in Arizona and other states and voter suppression and things that should be investigated. It's my personal belief that the candidate with the most pledged delegates going into the convention should win the nomination. I don't care if you're up by one pledged delegate. I don't care if you're up by 300 pledged delegates. The candidate that has won the primary, as per the voters, should win. which begs the question: what purpose do these superdelegates serve? In the Democratic Party, there are 719 total superdelegates. They make up almost 15% of the total vote. If they're just there to be a tiebreaker, why do we have such a large portion of our votes going to party insiders who are voting within the best interest of their party? Shouldn't the popular vote matter? Shouldn't the pledged delegate count matter? Should that number, do you think that number should be either eliminated or reduced to, say, 5%?
You need a tiebreaker. In our current system, you need a tiebreaker. My personal belief is that both systems on both sides need to be fixed and repaired entirely. Wipe them completely and start over, because they are impartial. You're talking about a Democratic Party that has 15% of the vote in 719 superdelegates that are partial votes. These are people who own these superdelegates. They represent people, and they have the choice to work and support and donate to candidates. Many superdelegates that are backing Hillary Clinton have worked for Hillary Clinton. They have donated to Hillary Clinton. That is so impartial.
Well, and again, my argument would be that this is the Democratic Party's primary. This is not the American voters' primary.
I understand that, but if you're opening it up to, if it's the Democratic Party and you are a registered Democrat, are you not a part of the Democratic primary?
Oh, absolutely.
Your vote matters. So if you go to a convention of 2026 to 2025, regardless of who the superdelegates have voiced their opinion for, they should represent the people who voted and go with the higher pledged count person.
That's how I feel as well.
Because of that, you do not need 15% of the vote being in superdelegates. 5% is fair. That'll be enough to make a tiebreaker, but 15% is astronomical, and it sets it up to look like it's a little corrupted bias.
It's a little bit rigged. Right. An interesting point was brought up in conversation yesterday of why do these primaries last 3 and 4 months?
Right.
Why don't we have our primary election on one day in February?
Mm-hmm.
And whichever candidate, regardless if there's 3 or 4 or 17, whichever candidate that day comes out with the most delegates is the presumptive nominee. Why do we drag out the primaries and then have a general election? Wouldn't you rather have a general election that's 3 months and a primary that's a day? Doesn't it feel a little backwards?
It does feel a little backwards, but I also feel this is, where I get a little conspiracy theorist. I do feel that it gives the media the opportunity to boost their preferred candidate. I'm going to say this. CNN is owned by Time Warner. Time Warner is one of the top 10 contributors to Hillary Clinton. There is a bias there. We have found the charts and graphs that show, and they're all referenced in our document that we will link here, that show the coverage of Hillary over Bernie, the times that Bernie's been blacked out in favor of Hillary in these media stations. The way the system is set up, now states do move up and down in election cycles. Occasionally, Nevada moved up, you told me, this cycle, ahead of a couple of states. But for the most part, you look at a blank picture of the U.S., and you go, okay, it's Hillary and Bernie. Which states go first? All of these southern states that are going to go to Hillary go first. They all go before Bernie. That allows us to say she's going to get a huge swing in momentum here before Bernie has a chance to gain momentum, and we can use that to say she's going to steamroll. She's going to crush.
So let's eliminate the idea of momentum entirely.
And have it all on one day. You allow them to campaign for the same time frame. If you want a 3-month primary, go for it. It's not my money. I'm not donating to a party because I'm an independent and I want to see what you can do with what you have. Let you campaign for 3 months in every state, but no state votes until that last day. Everyone votes. Whoever has the most delegate count in both parties are your nominees for November.
And then let's move forward.
Right. That's all you need to do. It's broken the way it is now. It's favorable to certain candidates the way it is now. It's a rigged system.
And this is a little off topic, but it's something I do want to bring up. Would you like to see, because I think I would like to see a law passed essentially saying that if you work in a news organization, you are not allowed to make substantial campaign contributions to any candidate. I stopped myself short of saying make no contribution because I feel like it's your right as a citizen to make a contribution.
But it needs to be private. You can't let it bleed into what you do in the news. John Scarsbo, who makes donations to Hillary Clinton, uses his show to promote Hillary Clinton. over the other Democratic candidate. Chris Matthews, hardball, does the exact same thing while they contribute at the same time. You want to privately contribute, that's fine. That's your right as an American citizen. But when you allow that as a company to go into your broadcasting to the American citizens, that's wrong.
You can't allow it to compromise your journalistic integrity.
Well, yeah, but let's be honest. Journalism doesn't exist in America right now.
Well, journalism does exist. There's just, few and far between.
There are places that report the facts and then places that report what they want you to perceive as the facts, i.e., Bernie can't win, Hillary's guaranteed to get to 2383, which we have proven in our charts, in our research, and in our links that you'll see here on this page that we're going to upload as well. It's highly unlikely she hits 2383.
Okay, so we're a little over our time, but just to recap. So there's a lot of math here. We understand there's a lot of math. There are a lot of numbers. We're not plugging Bernie. We're not saying that Bernie should win. What we're saying is there's a media bias that has painted the picture of especially the Democratic primary election in a way that has made it seem like Bernie has been much further behind for months now than he actually is. And we feel that the media can have an influence over the voters where the voters will not go out to the polls. We feel like it's important for this idea of pledge delegates to be more important than super delegates, and for that distinction to be drawn and provided to the average voter who doesn't have the time to sit down and chart out every single state and all the delegates.
Right.
So I understand there's a lot of math, but we feel this was an important topic to cover. The democratic process is an important topic to cover. We'd appreciate any comments, opinions on this. And I do want to note that we are going to be posting the document that we use for our show's organization. It has several very interesting articles on Bernie's path to victory, a Politico article on why Bernie is done, just to show some contrast, and a copy of our spreadsheet with the proportional delegate allocation. If you want to take a look at that, please comment, please provide input.
All I have to say, all the information that we've put in here has been double-checked, triple-checked, quadruple-checked. We went through so many different sources, so many different outlets to get to this, and the main goal here, again, wasn't to promote Bernie over the other. It's not my job to tell you who to vote for. It would be incredibly hypocritical of me to sit here and say journalists can't do it, but I can. Even though I'm not reporting news, I still don't find that that's within my capacity as a human to tell you who to vote for. However, you do need to vote. You do need to understand the facts, and that's what's missing from these shows right now. The facts are not 100% in what they're telling you. Not that they're changing the facts, but that they're leaving very key elements out. As far as California goes, California is the next major state to vote.
It's the largest state to vote.
It's the largest state to vote as well. June 7th is their voting day. Independent voters, as it's a semi-open primary, have until May 23rd to register for their right to vote. California has already come under scrutiny for trying to make this more difficult. I urge you, as an American citizen in California and all of the remaining states that have not voted yet, to do what it takes to register to vote and make your voice heard. It is incredibly important in the preservance of democracy to go out there and cast your vote, to make your vote matter.
For whichever candidate.
Exactly. So we really appreciate you guys being patient with us. We know that we've said we didn't want to talk about politics a whole lot, but this is less about the politics of the situation and more about the media's projecting of the situation. And we felt that it deserved to be accurately displayed with all aspects of it, not just which favors which candidate.
Sounds good to me. This has been the Coffee Milk Hour. We're glad to bring this to you. I'm Jerry.
I'm Puffy.
And we'll see you Friday.